Hello, welcome back. We are Astro Sophia Kairos, and I'm Sonia, and with me I have my good friend Krista from Practical Astros, and we're back with your January weekly astro update. And this week we're going to be looking at the 15th to the 22nd of January. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
And this is our overview in case you need it. You've probably seen it before, but we've got a rundown there of all the transits that we're looking at for January. We're going to be looking from the 16th to the 22nd, just catching the end there of the first page, the Sun in Capricorn opposite Mars in Cancer, and running through Sun entering Aquarius, Venus in Pisces meeting Saturn, and the Sun meeting Pluto. Here are the three. It is. Yeah, that Aquarius is a real important spot, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And also the Sun opposite Mars, with Mars being retrograde. It's like that. The Sun is in Mars's exaltation there.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's opposing it in its fall. So that seems significant, even though the Sun is not in its exile until it reaches Aquarius. But it still seems important to be in the exaltation, looking at Mars in fall is kind of lighting up that place where Mars wants to be.
Yeah.
The place
Jealousy.
inspiring to get.
Jealousy from afar.
Yeah, it's retrograde and fallen over in Cancer, and remembering that nostalgia for that place where it was exalted once.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that the Sun's lighting up. And then when the Sun moves on the 19th and enters Aquarius, and we're going to get that with every planet that enters Aquarius, we know that they're going to meet Pluto imminently. On the same day, we've got Venus in Pisces meeting Saturn. So that's quite an important meeting, an important point in their cycle. And it begins a new cycle for them, like a meeting point where they set a new agenda. So whatever their last meeting in their last cycle has been about, that's all gone now. That's finished, over with, their last story, and they set a new story. And that's going to be important because Venus will be retrograding when she carries on her journey. She'll travel into Aries and then she'll return back into Pisces. So whatever this new agenda is, it will instantly be going back on it and reviewing it straight away. She doesn't get very far before she returns to have another look.
Yeah, she doesn't retrograde back as far as 16 degrees, but she is coming back to the Venus, the Pisces house for sure. She retrogrades at 14. She goes into Aries and then retrogrades back to 14. So 14. It's getting close enough to that, but it's still bringing in, like weaving in that Pisces story.
Yeah, it seems important because of we don't get the Venus retrogrades that often. So
yeah.
So when she has an important conjunction just before the retrograde point, it seems significant to note that that's what's going to be happening as she continues her journey.
Yeah, it's been like a year and a half. Is that right? It was in Leo in 2023, late 2023 that it happened. So you're right. It doesn't happen every year. Like, we get a couple of retrogrades of Mercury every year, but we don't get a Venus retrograde every single year. So it does feel significant.
Yeah, it's sort of like Venus and Mars, their retrogrades are much less. Even the outer planets retrograde every year. We're used to that energy, and they retrograde for quite a long time every year. But Venus and Mars, their retrograde energy is much less familiar. Mm-hmm. And much fewer people have the retrogrades in their natal charts as well than any of the other planets, because they are less usual for us. And then on January the 21st, we have the Sun in Aquarius, and it gets to that 0-1 degrees where it meets Pluto. And again, that's a new point in their cycle. So we'll be looking at that chart for you.
I just had thoughts about Sun in Aquarius meeting Pluto, but we'll save that for the end of the week.
So on the 16th, we have the Sun in Capricorn opposite Mars in Cancer, and that's at 26 degrees. So here we have the Sun in Capricorn, co-present with Mercury, and here we have retrograding Mars in Cancer. So as I said before, the Sun is in Mars's exaltation, and here we might have like impulses for dynamic action and assertion. It's kind of the yang energy, the boldness and the courage of Mars.
Yeah, I mean, Mars is here to kind of like fight for something. It's retrograde. Maybe it feels like it's being backed into a corner, and like it's like a duel between the Sun and Mars. There are these usually action-oriented planets, but Mars is not in a good position. So sometimes like an injured, venomous snake or an injured, like lethal animal is more dangerous because they're really like feeling like they have to fight for something even harder. And so I could see this being just like a real potent dynamic between the sun and Mars, kind of like maybe dueling it out or fighting it out with a Mars that might not be fully informed of what it's fighting for. It might be too wrapped up in its own martyrdom as like a martial word, or defending for something else, because Mars in Cancer is that mama bear energy. It's like fighting for the protection of others, maybe being a little self-righteous in that too. So again, it's kind of, it can be a little messy, a little tangled up with complicated emotions. But the Mars Sun opposition here does feel like kind of like an action yang bull sort of a day. Mars has come away from that opposition to Pluto, so it went from one opposition to another, and it might just be feeling a little defensive, a little touchy, a little like sensitive to injury or sensitive to insults. And Sun in Capricorn is no stranger to projecting insults because they see things very clearly in a Saturnian way. Having that Sun opposite Mars might just kind of bring a little bit more illumination to the wounds that Mars is already feeling in Cancer.
That is such a good way of putting it. I've got like that shadow side as well of this, can be like fierce and hot-headed, rough and insensitive, contentious, unpleasant, like the when you think of like the toxic masculinity. And Sean and I talked about this when they were in their square, and it was the time when that big boxing match was on, the Tyson match.
Oh yeah.
And like when the retrograde's coming up, it's like, okay, this is under review now, and what's working and what isn't. And it is a chance where it's being brought to light, and you're getting a chance now to see what we restart differently. So again, part along this retrograde story, there's like being punctuation points of illumination. So we had the Mars opposition, we've had the full moon, and now we're getting this Sun opposition. And again, this is another chance of illumination from this Capricornian yin place. Again, we spoke about like the feminine introspective energy coming in with this Saturn, this being Saturn's feminine side, the ebb and the flow. And this is where the ebb is, where it can reveal things a little bit more slowly and carefully, things that you might have to look a little bit harder for.
Yeah.
And the way that Mars is retrograde is a thing of review, as Krista said. What do you fight for? And that mama bear energy, and you can't just fight everyone. You sometimes have to bring a bit of strategy in. And Mars isn't always good at that. It's good at it in Scorpio maybe, but certainly in Cancer, that urge to protect. I mean, Austin Coppock was talking about when he experienced it, and he's got a new baby, and he just wanted to protect from everything, but he was seeing threats everywhere. And he was like, no, I've got to think about this a bit more carefully. And he was aware that he was getting overthinking it all, the security for his home and everything, and how to protect his home. And maybe this is another punctuation point where the Sun just illuminates it more clearly and helps you see through where you're overthinking and where you actually need to be a bit more strategic, or where you need to be a bit more realistic, because Capricorn will bring that planning and the pragmatic, earthy, foundational sense of the structures that are actually needed. So whatever structures you need to support what Mars is reviewing and rebuilding, maybe that's what the Sun is ready to bring in for you.
Yeah, I could see the Sun kind of sobering up a hot-headed Mars. Be like, calm the fuck down, Mars. We share a house access together. We want to bring the balance. So that sobering Sun to kind of help bring some restriction of that kind of messy, emotionally messy martyrdom of that Mars retrograde. So I guess I'll be team Sun for this aspect.
Yeah, they're just seeing threats everywhere and wanting to do something about it, but being restricted because Mars is in water and retrograde.
Yeah.
And struggling to create the right foundations, and the Sun being that sensible, okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to make a plan. It just feels like there's been these points where there's these opportunities, these helpers coming in with Mars. And it's not easy. The oppositions are of the nature of Saturn. You know, they want you to take time, make a careful, considered plan. You know, it's not fast in the way that Mars wants to act fast.
And it looks like they're both in the bounds of Saturn. Am I seeing that correctly? Or is the sun in the bound of Mars? It looks really close.
Yeah, that's actually hard to tell. Yes, Mars.
Okay.
Seeing Capricorn.
So it's playing by Mars's rules. Being in the bound of Mars, you know.
Yeah. Mars's resources. So Mars.
What about Mars? Is Mars in the bounds of Saturn then? Is there mutual reception by bound? 2612 of Cancer?
Saturn. Yeah.
Yeah, so they have mutual reception by bound. They're basically using each other's rules to play the game.
Yeah. That's actually quite nice, isn't it? That mutual reception, that sort of, give and take here.
Yeah.
You help me, I'll help you. We're both not in the best place, maybe, but you know, the sun is far from home. It'll be in its exile once it reaches Aquarius, and it's getting very close to that. And that meeting with Pluto. So both,
I mean, even though that, you know, the sun in Capricorn, you know, it's not, you know, the sun is at home in Leo, so it's an exile in Aquarius, but both Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is the furthest planet visible by naked eye. And so it's furthest away from the sun and the moon, right? So I kind of, even though in the traditional dignity scheme, the sun isn't exiled in Capricorn, it kind of feels like it. And especially because it's that Saturnian, that Saturnian house. So it will officially move into exile in Aquarius, but it already kind of has that vibe of like the sun in Capricorn feels out of place there anyway. And so it does bring a little bit of that energy. You know, it's laughable that the two consecutive houses are both ruled by Saturn, really reiterating the longevity and the time span that Saturn requires. The sun has to spend 60 degrees in Saturn's temples before it can move out of it. So it already feels like it's exiled here in Capricorn.
Yeah, it really does. So that was Mars opposite Sun. Saturn conjunct Venus.
All right, so here we are on Sunday, January 19th. We have Venus. It has been moving closer and closer to Saturn. Finally, they conjoin together at 16 degrees Pisces. Now, like we said earlier, that Venus will retrograde back into Pisces, but she's not going to retrograde back this far. So this is a singular point that is really celebrated by that Venus-Saturn conjunction. Now, Venus is exalted here in Pisces. Saturn doesn't have much dignity, but Saturn exalts in Libra, which is Venus's air domicile. So there is a little bit of symbiotic relationship with Saturn and Venus. And so this conjunction, they are fully merged. And so we look at just the blending of these pigments of, you know, Saturn and Venus together in this Pisces house. You know, Neptune is still co-present. It's about, you know, 10 degrees away. The North Node has moved in. And we look at this, there's a sextile from Mercury in Capricorn, you know, pretty closely. It's 15 degrees. It is opposite the moon, which is over there at 28 degrees Virgo. There is still the whole sign house square from Jupiter in Gemini at 11 degrees. And so there is some activity like that. That conjunction of Saturn and Venus is being witnessed by pretty much the rest of the chart. Pluto can't really see it. Mars is up there at 25 degrees Cancer, so it's in a whole sign trine, more tightly close to Neptune, but it can definitely see that conjunction. So it does seem kind of like a marriage between, you know, Venus and Saturn, that the rest of the sky is attending this momentary union. And then Venus will be moving past Saturn, going through Pisces into Aries, and then we'll retrograde back in to Pisces later on in the spring. But for this moment, there is this beginning story of Saturn and Venus together here, and Venus's exaltation of Pisces. So while the sun is at 29 degrees Capricorn, so the sun is about to move into Aquarius, but the sun still can witness it by whole sign sextile, which I think is kind of nice.
Yeah. I was thinking about, like, we're not always aware of what these planets meet and decide when they meet symbolically like this. It's we can't see it sometimes until there's actually like the full moon aspect of the opposition. This cycle that they're in now will last until the 7th of May 2027 when they start a new cycle in Aries. But this meeting is like this false start. We said before that Venus is going to be traveling through to Aries, and then she'll return and be traveling back towards Saturn, although she won't get back to this degree. So it kind of feels like unfinished business, like there's this meeting, but then she's almost like coming back and saying, are you sure? Do we need to get some of these details, before she really prepares to go direct in Aries? I think she's not really going to get started with the work, whatever they've agreed, until she's going forward in Aries.
And they will meet again this year. I was just looking at the retrograde. They're not going to get back to that 16th degree, but Venus will be retrograding back into Pisces. And so they're going to meet on April 7th at 25 degrees Pisces, with Mercury also there at 26 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Because Saturn is forward, Saturn is direct. So Saturn's going to speed up, going from, what are they now, 16, 25, by April 7th. So in about 6 weeks after this, they're going to conjoin. And then they'll meet again after, she's going to retrograde back, but they'll meet again at 27 degrees, which is the exaltation degree of Venus in Pisces. She will be direct. The moon will be close. So will the North Node. That's on April 24th. So this is a beginning of kind of a 3-part story this spring of the Venus and Saturn conjunction that will then start to unfold again with the squares and the oppositions that will happen over a period of a year. But I do like this first moment of them together at this kind of the middle ground. There's that Rumi quote of like, between right and wrong, there's a field, I'll meet you there. This is kind of the field that I feel like Saturn and Venus are going to be meeting at to start the story.
Yeah. And we've spoken before when Venus and Saturn have been together about the kind of archetypes, because they're very different. I mean, one's the malefic of the day sex and the other one's the benefic of the night sex. So they've got very different aims and objectives. But we have spoken about like, one of my archetypes was like the ballet teacher or a dance teacher where there's a lot of strictness and discipline needed to achieve something really beautiful and something arty and very creative. But to get there, you've got to have a really strict diet and like really turn up probably a lot of early mornings and 10 hours dancing, and the pain that's inflicted on your feet and the stress on the body and everything that creates. So, but also we spoke about, like, particularly in Pisces, about just reading Jane Eyre in the bath. And this idea of Jane Eyre as like a romantic love story, which is what Venus wants, but Saturn wants. Okay, what are the obstructions? What are the difficulties? And he's not making an easy path for these lovers, and he's throwing every single obstruction that there could possibly be. This isn't your typical love story that you're reading. This is more like reading a tragedy, isn't it? It's like all these difficulties, but the spoiler, it does end in the couple being together, but not without huge difficulties and a lot of time, like years pass, don't they, before they actually declare their love.
Yeah. That's interesting. I just heard a story a couple of days ago about the New York City Ballet and the point shoes that are handmade. They're handmade in London, and the ballet group in New York goes through over 7,000 pairs of shoes a year because they're beautiful. They're silk and they're hand hammered and they're handmade. It's of the feet, which is kind of the body part associated with Pisces. It is this grace and this beauty. By having point shoes, you're able to support the toes to hold the body up where it looks like you're standing on the toes, but the hard work and the skill and the discipline, which is very Saturnian, having that merge, it's like then you can have performances like the Nutcracker where you have this seamless display of beauty through the discipline and hard work that is held together by these satin and cardboard hand hammered shoes that they just churn through to create that beauty. It's like it comes with a lot of pain. It comes with a lot of personal sacrifice to be a ballerina, professional ballerina, the body sacrifice, the mental sacrifice, the time sacrifice. I mean, the dedication of life to be a ballerina. It's a professional sport. It takes so much to have that grace it comes directly from that discipline. And so if you're not a professional ballerina in New York City Ballet, I think reading Jane Eyre in the bath is an appropriate moment to celebrate that. But, what is it in the Pisces house of your chart is asking you to refine and exquisitely be disciplined with a creative source, because creation and artistic expression is Venusian, but also, it's Pisces, it's Jupiterian, it's that yin Jupiterian sign, but Saturn has been there for a while. What can Saturn bring that is structural and functional to create that disciplinary expression of beauty? I don't dislike it on paper. I think it's like classic odd couple of having that Saturn, malefic of the day sect and that benefic of the night sect kind of come together. Sometimes, the opposites can provide each other things that the other is missing. So,
yeah, that's so true. And yeah, the people being affected as well with thinking like it would be the mutable signs again, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo,
Sagittarius.
Yeah. But also like if you're Venus ruled chart, if you've got a Saturn ruled chart, or if your year is Venus or Saturn.
Yeah.
This new beginning again, and the run up to it, the release of the old story and the new beginning of a story in Pisces, that's going to be an extended time for you.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch, especially with the Venus retrograde coming back to review it. It's going to be more noticeable than previous conjunctions, I would feel, because of that retrograde activating it and returning to it. And like you say, then meeting again at the exaltation degree at 27 where Neptune is now.
I just wonder, like in the Northern Hemisphere, it's winter time. And so is there going to be like a great big snowstorm that happens that is just gorgeous, but also completely restricts us from traveling around?
Yeah.
It's like having that beauty of a fresh snow, like all the sound gets absorbed, even the birds kind of like stay in, and you have this beauty, but it's like this isolation and this starkness and this coldness that really kind of freezes everybody's position. And I could see that Saturn in a water sign with Venus being that beautiful snowstorm that kind of like temporarily holds us in. So as astro weather, like why not? Like the weather people are right and wrong half the time. So I predict a grand snowstorm on January 19th.
Yeah, just admire the beauty of the snowflake, like how precious it is and how unique they are, but how short lasting.
Yeah.
Just that moment, which is very mutable, isn't it? Or I suppose they stay and we want them to go. We want it to be a lovely snowstorm, and then the next day, could it all go?
Gray slush.
Yeah. And not cause disruption as it melts, please. So then we have Pluto conjunct the Sun. This is January the 21st. The Sun is ingressed into Aquarius, and it's meeting with Pluto in Aquarius at 1 degree. And this is the first time they've met in Aquarius, because even though Pluto moved into Aquarius before and retrograded back to Capricorn, the Sun never met it. The Sun always managed to meet it in Capricorn when it was retrograding or direct back in Capricorn. So this is a new thing for us. And again, this is a new cycle that they're starting. They're having this board meeting, agreeing new objectives and plans for the year ahead. And obviously the Sun's cycle is very, very predictable. It moves around the whole of the zodiac in a year, doesn't have retrogrades or anything. We don't have to worry about tracking it too much. It moves through the signs very predictably. So it's nice and easy for a new astrologer to understand the Sun's movement through the signs. We all know it. We know when our friends' birthdays are and who's on the cusp of a sign. So, that Sun moving in. And of course, the Sun in Aquarius is in that exile place. It's opposite the Sun's home sign of Leo. So that means the Sun is far from home and has to learn to work kind of in a different way. If you think of if you're an expat in a foreign country, you might just meeting people from your home country, suddenly they mean so much more to you than meeting people from your home country in your home country.
Yeah.
It's like that's not an unusual thing, but suddenly there's a community of expats when you're abroad, and it means so much, and you play music from home, and that suddenly becomes very nostalgic and meaningful in a way that it wouldn't in your home country. And the food from your home country might be harder to get hold of. But also you have to learn to do things in the way that that country does things. You have to obey their rules. You have to, meet their visa requirements, whatever it is. And usually you have a special skill, and that's why you're there as well, that you're meeting the needs of that country in a special way. So there might be a way that they admire you for the skills that you're bringing, that special skill that they need, and that reason why you're there. So there's something special that you're bringing, but you can't do everything maybe that you could do in your home country the way that you would. So you can't keep all your old customs. You think of people that have moved from the UK to Australia, and suddenly their Christmas Day is on the beach and it's sunny and hot. They can't have a Christmas where it's going to be raining or snowing. That's totally turned on its head. They're in a different hemisphere.
Literally.
Some things are very, very different, and some things might stay the same. You might try and keep those customs because they suddenly mean so much more to you than they did. So there's pluses and minuses of being in exile, but it brings an opportunity. If you think of like that reason that you've got that special skill and they need it and they respect it and admire it, brings you a reason to develop that skill. So having this meeting with Pluto, and it's important really that there's no sign of Saturn as well, the ruler. So you're kind of meeting like Pluto being this lord of the underworld, and the meeting site kind of in the secret with no sight of the ruler. There's no support here from the ruler. Saturn's conjunct Venus. They're having their meeting, like their benefic kind of shadow benefic kind of meeting. And here's another shadow and light meeting. These two things, we spoke before about two things being true at once, and it's kind of carrying that energy as well. These two meetings of shadow and light becoming so important. And we see Aquarius and Taurus being in a square.
Well, just like what's visible, that conjunction. I mean, because Mercury can't see it. Gemini can see it by trine. The moon can see it by trine. Mars can't see it. Venus, Neptune, Saturn can't see it. So just thinking of like what's witnessing this, that the moon and Jupiter can like witness it, just to be like, what are those two doing over there? In that faraway place of Aquarius. The two things that kind of come up for me is within the United States, the day before, when the sun is applying to Pluto, we're going to have an inauguration of a new president, a new power source. And if you think of the sun as a power source and Pluto as a power source, what is that ushering in of that new power source of an Aquarian sun conjoined an Aquarian Pluto? The other thing that got my attention is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that the story that we're kind of closing up here, was at 0 degrees Aquarius, so very close to this conjunction itself. So is this a continuation of the story that started on December 21st, 2020, which was kind of that COVID, year? It's like that story is closing, but there's a next addition to this continuation of that first decan of Aquarius, which is Venus ruled, like it's not just all masculine, yang, potent, powerful energy. Venus, feminine energy, has her own source of power. And so what is that secret source of power that Venus is cooking up with Saturn in a sign that is kind of averse to this Pluto-Sun conjunction? At the early stages, it's harder to tell exactly how that's going to play out. We start to see that with that first opening square of like, oh, this is the problem that maybe is going to come from this. So it's a powerful moment, and maybe there will be something really flashy on the news that day when it happens, but I feel like we might start to see it as that opening square is revealed. And so, as the sun kind of travels through, and we'll square it when the sun gets to Taurus. So that January to May, that January to April event timeline will be kind of showing what the possible tensions of this new storyline that's being written. But this day itself, feels like a day of history because we have never experienced it as a society, as a world, because none of us have been alive since the last time this happened. So
exactly. And also just thinking the sun will sextile Pluto on the ingress, on the Aries equinox. So that will also carry that energy forward. And that'll be a first as well, won't it? To have the Aries equinox being Pluto. That's all changed, isn't it, with this Pluto story?
Yeah, because Pluto was in Capricorn when the sun moved into Pisces. That was the first sextile. Mm-hmm. And so it was always happening when it was in Capricorn. This, just looking through We did have it. So March 21st, 2024, when the sun moved into Aries at 1 degree 41 minutes, Pluto was at 1 degree 41 minutes. So we did have it for 2024. And then we had it again with the sun in Sagittarius on November 21st, 2024. And then so March 23rd will be the third time that this happens with the sun at 3 degrees. Gosh, Pluto's moving fast, it seems, at that point. We've been used to it being at 0 degrees forever, but it'll be 3 degrees, 24 minutes, Aquarius, and the sun will be 3 degrees, 24 minutes. Venus will be retrograde at 2, and Mercury will be retrograde at 5. So not only will the sun be sextile in Pluto, but Venus and Mercury are going to get involved as well with that story. They'll be flanking the sun, both retrograde moving towards Pluto. So I do feel like that the eclipse, the equinox that's happening in March of this year will be fully loaded with lots of information. Again, speaking to that graphic that we did at the very beginning of the series of like how much is happening in Aries, that retrograde with Mercury and Venus going through Aries and into Pisces does really speak to that. And maybe they just wanted to get involved with this Pluto story, But the January 21st date with the sun conjoining that does feel very notable. I don't want to say interesting because that's a word that we just use so much. It's like, yes, it's interesting, but it's notable, it's significant, it's powerful. It's like the potential, like what else is there with Aquarius? It's like, it could be so many things. And whatever house Aquarius is for you, maybe you'll see them, that spark of ingenuity happening with those two power sources of Pluto and the sun.
It's really good. Yeah, I've got some notes on just the connection with these two. From archetypal astrology, the archetypal astrologer. When these two meet, it can show intense enthusiasm and drive and connection with the primal natural energies and the interplay of ego and shadow, struggle for self-conquest, surges of creative potency. So, as Krista says, notable. Yeah. But also shadow of ruthless and driven and an urge to dominate and control. Willful flaunting of sexual or shadow energy, obsessive self-expression and self-celebration. And some archetypes is like Jekyll and Hyde or Christ, death and rebirth. So like that Plutonian death and rebirth energy. Their last conjunction was the 20th of January 2024 at 29 Capricorn. And their next conjunction will be the 23rd of January, the 26th, and that will be at 3 degrees. So I guess Pluto will have moved to 3 and then maybe retrograde back by 2026.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And Mars and Mercury and Venus will all be within that range. Venus is at 7 degrees, Mercury is at 4, the Sun and Pluto are at 3, and Mars at 0. So,
wow.
2026.
Yeah, it's all happening. I mean, certainly, a lot of the astrologers are saying like 2025 is like that bridging year, that introduction, and then 2026.
Yeah, full on.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot. Okay, so that concludes that week, and we'll be back with you next week to look at the 22nd to the 29th of January. That will wind up the first month of 2025 for us.
Yeah.
So I'm Sonia from Celestia Astrology, and with me I have my good friend Krista from Practical Astros. And just a reminder, we're both consulting astrologers, so our books are open, and you can find us at our websites, which are listed here and also will be in the show notes. We're both founder members of Astero Sophia Kairos, and us and our colleagues are all listed in the show notes. We all have our books open, so you can find any of us. If you've enjoyed this, we do encourage you to like and subscribe. It's really important for small channels, and we all do a happy dance when you do. So we really do appreciate you. And if you have any questions, please do add them to the comments. So thank you so much, and thank you, Krista, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia.
Thank you.